Yo, what is up, ladies and gentlemen? It is your boy Zether here, back at it again to drop another movie special. This obviously being for the 15K special. Some of you guys were probably thinking, yo, Zether's completely just not going to acknowledge his milestones anymore. And to that I say, yes, I will. I am. I was a little lazy to record this a while ago, and so I'm barely doing it now. Now, for those of you wondering, I was the one who made this thumbnail. That's why it doesn't have the little white outline to him, because, my software doesn't allow me to do that. But, that being said, make sure you guys go check out the Akatsuki channel. It's our group channel. Me, Rogex, Inosuke, and Phoenix Sunning are featured there. We are going to be having a little bit of a podcast where we all kind of just talk and just kind of be random in case you guys want to check that out. But with that being said, I do not want to waste any more of you guys' time, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Alright, so we pick off our story the day that Deku was born. In this version of events, Deku will of course be looking like the normal version of Izuku. Except in this version, he's going to have a little bit more of femaleiistic features, just due to the fact that Inosuke low-key do be looking like a girl. So in this version, Deku is going to take up after more of his mother, and he is of course still going to have his green hair. Everything about Deku is basically relatively the same, just that a little bit of his genetics are a little better due to his father in this version of events being a little bit more on the bodybuilder side. That being said, we're basically going to start our story off when he and Deku's family are on basically on a little bit of a camping trip. On this current day, Deku will of course be an infant, and this is basically when they're having just a normal camping trip. On this time, Hisashi decided that, he was gonna try to go to a different spot, somewhere where there wasn't so many people. And so they ended up camping out in an area where it was not supposed to have anybody there. It's an area which is restricted to the normal eye, but Hisashi was like, it'll be more fun this way. So they ended up doing that. However, things took a turn for the worse when a wolf pack, or a pack of wild animals, honestly, it doesn't matter. Like, you guys can really just have any animals be the ones that are attacking them. However, two of them will actually be quirked beasts, which is why they were able to overpower Hisashi. In this moment, Hisashi would basically try to protect his family using his fire-breathing quirk. However, he will end up getting mauled by the beasts themselves, and this is when Inko would grab Deku and begin to run. Now, this of course would lead them to basically corner her on top of a waterfall. She will be very high up in the air, and this is when she would of course throw him off to have him have a slight chance of surviving. Afterwards, she would try to run off, but the pack of animals would end up getting her. This leads to Inko and Hisashi unfortunately passing away very soon in this version, and this would lead to Deku being raised by boars, just like Inosuke was. Now, this is when Deku's childhood would be very, very similar to that of Inosuke's, where he would learn beast breathing, and he would even learn many of Inosuke's techniques, that being on a much slower level, due to the fact that Deku was out in the wilderness and he doesn't have any knowledge of quirks or anything like that. So Deku is going to be a little bit mindless. This leads to Deku growing up and becoming a sort of Inosuke person. This might as well honestly be called What If Inosuke Was an MHA, but, that wouldn't get so many views, which is why we're titling it What If Deku. And I mean, technically it is Deku, but still. That being said, Deku will one day be 12 years old when he is basically just roaming around the forest. Now, it's on this particular day where Deku will kind of just be running around with two jagged swords that he ended up taking away from another random family, which thought that it was okay to go out camping. He ended up stealing it from them, and the kid ended up challenging him with them. So Deku, he folded him like a lawn chair, and this means that Deku had a couple of years to basically train with his beast breathing style. This basically leads to the day where I am currently on. Deku will be 12 years old roaming the forest, and this basically leads to Deku just running around. At this point, he already has the boar mask on him. His parents, the boars, would have already passed away in this version of events due to disease or something like that, and this basically leads to Deku roaming around on a more hospitable part of the forest. This is when Deku would have run into a couple pro heroes, and I'm pretty sure many of you guys can already guess who these are. This being the Wild Cats. I'm not going to say the other word because, YouTube and the yellow check. I don't want to get that. Anyways, that being said, Deku would run into them, and this is when Deku would see them, and they would actually immediately walk over to Deku, thinking that it's some sort of mutated animal. They would walk over to him, the big one, he would actually walk up to Deku and try to pet him, but this is when Deku would scream and say, "Get away from me!" And the guy would just look at him and be like, "Huh?" This is when immediately Deku would punch him in the stomach and say, "What? You want to fight?" He would basically start, inhaling and exhaling from his nostrils on some Inosuke stuff, and he'd be like, "Kid, calm down," as Deku would be like, "No, don't tell me to calm down, you challenging me." And this is when, basically one of the wild cats would basically look towards him, and she would create a bunch of mud monsters, to which Deku would slash up immediately. He would use what is the breathing style called again? I'm not gonna lie, I low-key forgot some of the names. So let me look it up right now, just in case there's some of you guys who are gonna be like, "Hey bro, you ain't even get the names wrong." But anyways, Deku would literally just use second fang slice, and he would basically slash up a bunch of the monsters. He would start using a bunch of the beast breathing techniques, and he would start taking them down very, 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 very rapidly. However, this is when Mandalay would use her ability to control the earth a little bit, and she would basically start shaking up Deku, causing him to get a little bit of motion sickness, and this would lead to Deku's movements getting sluggish. They would start fighting, and this is when Deku would actually end up taking out the big one, the big guy one of the wild, cats. And this basically leads to Deku then having to fight more mud monsters and having to deal with more motion sickness. This eventually leads to Deku getting basically GG'd by the wild, cat. And afterwards, they basically walk up to Deku's unconscious body as he has a couple of broken ribs. And honestly, it's a miracle that he got knocked out. He got knocked out by pure chance. They ended up accidentally hitting him in the head, and that basically led to Deku getting a concussion and passing out. This is when they would take off the boar head and realize that he's just a normal kid. They realized that this kid must not be any older than 12 years old, and this is when they would basically take him to a station where Deku would then be examined by a bunch of police officers after he heals up. They offer him some food, and Deku's like, "Get that away from me, I gotta hunt for my meals." And they basically give it to him, and then they're like, "Well, I guess you don't want it then. I mean, we'll have to give it to someone else who will take it." And Deku immediately, as soon as they say that they'll give it to someone else, Deku immediately starts gobbling that stuff. He immediately is just like, "Yo, this is bomb," and he just continues to eat more. As that basically leads to Deku being willing to answer a couple of questions. They would ask him who his parents are, and Deku would say that this is one of his parents' heads. They'd say, "What is he talking about?" And Deku would say that he was raised by boars, as they would immediately realize that this kid must be an orphan. This is when the wild cats would basically realize that his parents must be off the grid, and due to the fact that Deku doesn't even know his own name, he ended up renaming himself Inosuke. This basically led to them all realizing that he's going to basically be thrown into foster care, and that's basically what they end up doing. Deku would end up basically going to foster care, where Deku would be extremely rowdy. He would immediately get kicked out because he was just way too much for the foster care people to handle, and this is basically when the wild cats would basically be forced to take Deku in. They would end up raising him as one of their own, and they would have a very rough time for the first couple of days. They would immediately very rapidly find out that the best way to get to Deku is by telling him that he can't do something, which is why they would basically tell him that he can't stay calm even if his life depended on him. And he would immediately just be like, "I can't too, you know what, I'll stay calmer than anybody's ever stayed calm." And this basically leads to Deku finally calming down with the wild cats. This is when it would lead to them all basically finally getting adjusted to Deku, and Deku would end up basically telling them that if they want him to stay with them and not leave them, he needs to basically be allowed to train. And so they would basically, using some of that pro hero money, would give him a little bit of a facility where Deku can train, and they would actually get him his own little gym where Deku can lift a lot of weight. Deku is not any joke. And at this point, I'm just going to be saying that Deku is as strong as Inosuke was when they first met him. This would basically lead to Deku going to school due to the fact that he accepted that deal, and this is where he would immediately refuse to take off the boar head. Teachers would immediately try to take it off of him, and Deku would just refuse. At one point, he actually ended up getting into an altercation with the teachers where he had to basically just dropped the man like a lawn chair, and it didn't end good. They ended up getting expelled, and this basically leads to Deku getting expelled a lot of times from multiple different schools until he finally eventually calms down after he meets someone who is almost as crazy as he is. Her name being Katsumi Bakugo. Yup, it's a gender-bended Bakugo, but don't worry guys, it's not going to be a main focus of the story. It will be the ship, however, it basically won't really matter in this story, seeing as Inosuke is not the type of character who has ships. It's kind of just going to be like a last thing where at the end he basically ends up with her. But that being said, Deku would meet Katsumi, and one day when he was getting a little rowdy, she ended up getting angry and, throwing an explosion at him. which led Deku to try to fight her, but he would remember what Mandalay told him, and he would end up waiting for the last minute of the school, where we would basically end up challenging her on Dagoma Beach, and Deku would end up winning the battle. This would lead to Katsumi respecting Deku, and Deku would actually say that she was actually kind of strong for a woman. She would say that, what does that have to do with anything? Deku would tell her that, you know, a very sexist remark, and Katsumi would get angry, shooting an explosion at Deku's head, which leads to the Born Mask actually blasting right off of him, which leads her to see him for the very first time. She would actually immediately just be drawn in by the way he looks, and Deku would just be like, "Hey, what'd you do that for?" As Deku would basically look at her and she'd be like, sorry. As Deku would look at her and be like, "Damn right." He would then basically walk off really angry at the fact that she took her mask off. And this would basically lead to Deku and Katsumi fighting a couple of times after school for about 2 years, until at one point Deku finally just acknowledges her and they would finally start training after a while, to which Deku kind of views them as rivals and not really friends. He doesn't really look towards her as somebody who he can just talk to. The whole entire time that Deku's basically around, he just trains and trains and trains. That's basically all Deku likes to do, which is basically all that happens until the point of the 10 months training arc, where they basically have the 10 months to train. This will lead to Katsumi and Deku training a whole lot during that time period, and she would get very, very powerful. This version of Katsumi is extremely skilled with her quirk. She is very adapted with her quirk, just due to the fact that she had to fight somebody who was just insane. Therefore, she ended up developing a very unorthodox beast-like fighting style, just very similar to Deku. And Deku ended up getting very powerful due to the fact that in this version, yes, he doesn't have to fight against demons. However, he does have to fight against quirked people on a day-to-day basis. People like Mandalay, pro heroes. And at this point, Deku was even more powerful than their whole, Wild Wild Cat squad. So Deku is on a very high level in terms of just normal quirkless human. They ended up actually finding out that Deku was quirkless. However, his weird breathing forms allowed Deku to access power, which is very strange for normal people. That being said, this is when we're basically just going to skip on over to the day of the entrance exam, due to the fact that Inosuke's training is not very much specified in the anime. And if you guys have seen Demon Slayer, most of you guys probably know what Inosuke's training basically leads to. At this point, this basically leads to an Inosuke who is about as strong as the one that fought the Spider-Man, the little spider beast thing, the one that wasn't exactly an upper moon. However, he was very powerful, and that's basically what happens. During this version of the entrance exam, Deku doesn't end up fighting the robots, because simply put, Deku ends up taking the recommendation exam, to which he barely passes also. Like, it's not like Deku passed it by a landslide like you would expect. Deku barely passes this thing. And the reason he barely passes it is because Deku is not smart. Even though he had more years than Inosuke had to basically get used to the normal world, he's still not book smart. Maybe he might be a little street smart at this point, but book smart, absolutely not. There's none of that. And this leads to Deku meeting people like Todoroki and Momo. This is when he basically ends up seeing them. However, due to the fact of Inosuke's nature, he basically thinks that he is strongest. And that's basically what Deku's mindset is. The only person who he views as somebody worthy to fight is somebody along the lines of All Might. And that is why Deku wants to become a hero, because he wants to have an excuse to basically fight All Might. Being a hero, that does not interest him whatsoever. However, fighting very powerful villains and powerful adversaries is something that Deku cannot pass up. And due to the fact that he is quirkless, they do allow him to use his swords in the recommendation exam, which leads to Deku barely passing. However, he gets extremely high marks on the aptitude test, the one where he basically has to do real, cool activities, I guess you'd say. He ends up seeing people like Momo and Todoroki, which actually catch a little bit of his interest, especially Todoroki, due to the fact that he has a very cool ice quirk. Deku views quirks as a weakness, however, in this version, just due to the fact that people rely on those too much. And Deku doesn't need any of that quirk stuff to be powerful. He'll become the most powerful hero in the world without nothing like a quirk. That's how Deku views things. This is basically when we're just going to skip to the first day of school, where Deku basically goes not wearing any uniform. He wears the normal Inosuke outfit, and yeah, nobody is exactly happy with that. As soon as Deku walks in the classroom, he would kick the door, and immediately everyone would stare at his direction as he would go sit in the back. And this is when a bunch of people would be staring at him, to which Deku would be like, "What? You guys got a staring problem? I'll fight you all right now." Katsumi would then walk in the door, and she'd basically sit next to Deku, and she'd be like, same old Inosuke. As she would sit next to him and start talking. And this is when immediately Aizawa would wake up and be like, looks like I got a problem, child. As he would then tell them all to put these on and meet him outside. As he would ask Deku why he's not wearing the costume, Deku would say that he doesn't need to wear any of that stuff. And this is when Deku would end up basically taking the quirk assessment, to which Deku would go to the fitting rooms to get changed. However, in this version, Kirishima, after he sees how ripped Deku is, or Inosuke is, he would just be like, dude, what do you do? In this version, Deku's muscle will be way more toned than Inosuke, just due to the fact that not only does he have like the old traditional ways of training, he also has new machinery, which definitely does give better results. And this leads to a much more buffer, stronger Deku. That being said, at this point, Deku is way past the level of like that weak non-upper moon level demon. And Deku is around the level of Inosuke would be after he mastered concentration breathing. However, he still hasn't mastered that, so Deku still has a lot of amps to go during the series. If you guys think that Inosuke Deku is a little more powerful, it's just due to the fact that, you know, quirkless people are more powerful and he has to deal with people like that all the time, so he basically ended up adapting to that. That being said, Deku would go outside and he would take the little aptitude or the little quirk assessment test, to which Deku would actually slap all of the markings. He would get incredible markings for someone who's quirkless. However, that wouldn't be enough to top somebody like Momo, who did have the perfect tools for every single test. He ended up losing to her by 10 points. And after all is said and done and Deku looks at the rankings, as soon as Deku notices that Momo beat him, he would immediately rush at her and pick her up. As Aizawa would literally throw his scarf at him, Deku would look at him as he would say, huh? What is this weak stuff? As Aizawa would look at Deku, he would say, hey, stop that or I'll be forced to expel you. To which Deku would immediately realize that somebody just challenged him. Deku would just be like, nah, and he would break out of the scarf as Deku would rush at Aizawa, and he would bang his head on Aizawa's head, to which Aizawa would just get like dizzy. And after this, Aizawa would try to use his quirk erasure quirk, but this is when he would realize Deku is using 0 quirks, absolutely none, and Deku would proceed to almost fold Aizawa like a chair if it wasn't for the rest of UA basically helping take Deku down. They all basically had to step in because Aizawa was taking a fat L. Like, Aizawa could not do anything. And when Aizawa threw his scarf at him, Deku caught that thing and pulled him in and just almost killed him with the sword. He ended up scratching him up pretty bad. I don't know if you guys remember, if any of you guys have seen the Batman and Robin movie where Nightwing ended up finding Damian Wayne, but Deku left Aizawa in a very, very bad state. That being said, this basically leads to Deku getting brought to the front office where he sees Nezu, and Aizawa would immediately try to expel Deku, to which Nezu would actually look at Deku's direction. He would see the boar mask and see his animalistic nature, and he would say, no, this student will not be expelled, Aizawa. It is our job to mold them into perfect heroes, and if we cannot mold this child into a hero, think of what would happen. What would happen if we just let him go rabid? He'd become a vigilante, he may just return to the forest, and we will not get any fruits from his labor. Think about things, Aizawa. You have to mold this kid into a proper hero. That is when he would then look towards Deku's direction and say, you need to put your part in, boy. You must stay still in class and let Aizawa do his teaching. As Deku would look at him and say, huh, who are you? I'm not going to take any orders from any teacher or mouse. As Deku would say, you want to fight me? Nezu would then look at Deku and say, well, I mean, I guess he just can't stay still. I guess he's not the same as other kids. I feel like they might be better than him. And of course, Mandalay and the rest of the Wild Cats basically told him that that was Deku's weakness. To which Deku would, after hearing this, he would immediately be like, absolutely not. I can do anything. Like he would, the little, I can do anything better than you. Better than you, better than you. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that song, but that would basically start playing in the background, and Deku would start being a role model student from this day forward. Deku would still not take off the boar mask, however, he would start behaving and being quiet. He would start trying to pay attention to class, and he would start getting a little smarter. This is when we're basically just going to skip over to the day of the heroes versus villains due to the fact that there's not really any content to cover there. That being said, now we are going to cut over to the day of the heroes versus villains where Deku has to fight a certain 2 people. This is when we're going to jump right into things. All Might would bust in the door saying, I am here, as he would be like coming in like a normal teacher, as everybody would be shocked. You know, just some usual class 1A scenario, to which All Might would immediately just start talking to them, and he would then tell them all that the clothes make the pros. which leads to them all suiting up, and this is when everybody would meet him outside, to which All Might would announce the matches. In this version, Deku will not be fighting Bakugo, or in this version, Katsumi. She is gender bended. For those of you who are wondering, gender bended, in case some of you guys don't know, is when you basically, alter someone's gender in a story. Because I remember when I was watching Rogue X a long time ago, and I saw his little, what if Deku was a Dragonborn or something like that. I remember I saw that, and every time he said Todoroki and Deku were doing stuff, I was just like, dude, please tell me this isn't what I think it is. And thank God it wasn't, because I finally found out what that meant. That being said, though, that's basically what gender bending is, where you change the gender and all that, yada yada yada. But that being said, this basically leads to Deku smiling after Deku gets told who he has to fight against. And Deku has to fight against Mineta and Momo, and after hearing that, Deku just smiles. He gets a little mischievous smile as he thinks that he finally gets to put that girl in her place. She beat him in that little quirk assessment, and now he's gonna beat her even worse. And Momo, after seeing who she has to fight against, yeah, she is scared, and especially by the fact that her teammate is a little perv. Yeah, Momo has no chance. That being said, Deku would absolutely abolish Momo. And due to the fact that he's fighting against students, he does have wooden swords, leading to, Deku not really being able to cut them that bad, but Deku does still overall obliterate Momo and Mineta. He does end up getting caught by one of Mineta's balls on the floor, and this just makes Deku angry. He literally yanks off his leg from that, and it actually ends up peeling some of Deku's skin from his feet. But Deku does not care. He just rushes at Mineta and bangs on the top of his head with the sheath of the sword, knocking him out. And as for Momo, he literally drops the sword and just starts pounding her. Like, he tells her, this is what you like? You beat me. You think you're stronger than me? Deku just has that weird reaction. This is when Deku would finally defeat everybody, and All Might would call the match. Deku would walk away from that a little angry, and Deku's teammate would of course have been Araraka. She'd be a little scared off by Deku, but she's fine with it. She won. That being said, after this, Deku would say that those opponents were so weak. He wants to fight someone real, as he would look towards All Might, and he would immediately just go over to grab his real swords, as he would rush towards All Might, and All Might would just be like, as he would grab one of Deku's swords. He would catch it with two hands, basically like in some casual anime where he would catch the part of the blade that isn't sharp, and All Might would catch both of them with both hands, as he would say, "Child, calm down." Deku would literally climb up his body, as he would literally run up his body and kick All Might in the head, flipping backwards and landing on the ground, as he would say, "I want to fight you, All Might." All Might would then wipe away some blood as he would spit it off and say that he only has 2 minutes left. He needs to make this quick. He would then look towards him and immediately tell the class that, whatever, he might as well have a little bit of a fun event. As he just chalks it up to that, the students would all just be like, what? This quirkless kid's gonna fight against All Might? And this is when Katsumi would facepalm, as she's just like, oh no. And Deku's like, yes, I get to fight All Might. I get to prove I'm the strongest. All Might would immediately just be like, whatever. And immediately he would get into fighting position as he's getting ready to absolutely destroy Deku. Needless to say, All Might curb stomps this man. He literally grabs All Might's katanas and he just shatters them with a punch. And when Inosuke, or Deku should I say, punches All Might in the face, it literally doesn't do anything. Deku grabs his head, smashes him into the ground, and that's GG. Deku just gets obliterated. And this means when Deku wakes up, he is angry. Like, Deku is mad, but he uses that anger to channel it towards his training, which leads to a week of intense training, to which Deku gets even more powerful. And this is going to be essential for the USJ arc. That being said, we're basically going to skip through these days, to which we are finally going to arrive to the USJ arc, where everything finally starts to get a little spicy, I guess you could say. That being said, the USJ arc would basically arrive, and this is when Deku would, of course, get on the bus, and everybody would have their normal trip to the USJ. The Ida stuff would still happen. Ida would still be class president. However, in this version, he was picked off rip due to the fact that Deku is not exactly a role model student who they want to be led by. That being said, as soon as they would arrive outside of the USJ, before 13 even had the chance to give her speech, Deku would notice something. Deku would notice that the area feels off, as Deku would immediately just realize that he needs to definitely try something out. But before Deku has a chance to basically stab his swords into the ground and use 7th form spatial awareness, Deku has a very shocking realization happen. As soon as that happens, Kurogiri would open his portal and he would say, "Welcome, villains. Sorry to crash in, but we figured we would invite ourselves in." And this is when everybody would get teleported away. Everything would basically happen as in canon. Kirishima and Katsumi would rush in, and they would get teleported to the different area. But this version of Katsumi would handle these villains way faster, leading to her being able to arrive and help Aizawa out way faster. But this also means that Deku gets teleported with Tsuyu Mineta, saved by Tsuyu, and he would actually get angry when she saves him. He would say that he didn't need her help. He could have beat those villains all by himself. To which she's just like, okay. And, Deku's, he's having some normal Inosuke situation. He would immediately not even ask them for their quirks, and he would just jump off of the ship as Deku would literally immediately just say, "Fifth Fang! Crazy cutting!" as he would just start slashing the air, creating so much wind pressure that they would still have a little bit of a spiral, and Tsuyu would catch him with his tongue, and she would arrive back on land. All the villains that were caught in the original would still get caught, and this basically leads to Deku seeing Aizawa get beat up by a bunch of villains. This is when Deku would tell them both to get out of here. So he would rush in there with his swords and just start hitting people in their head with the part that isn't sharp from his swords. He would just start beating them like relentlessly. And this is basically when Deku would just start fighting like an absolute madman. They would start defeating everybody, and this is when the Nomu would finally get called out by Shigaraki. Shigaraki would say, "Nomu, kill the brat," as the Nomu would immediately shriek to the skies and he would rush at Deku. As they would punch Deku, Deku would move his bones as he would immediately dodge the blow, and he would slash at the Nomu's arm as the Nomu would literally regenerate and Deku's sword would be stuck. Deku would try to get loose, but this is when the Nomu would punch Deku square in the face, sending him flying. As Aizawa actually has to catch Deku with a scarf, Aizawa would then rush at the Nomu, deactivating its quirks, and this would lead the Nomu to have nothing but its super strength. And this leads to Deku rushing back in the fight, saying, "I'm not done yet," as he'd basically be like, "Ah!" and he'd rush at the Nomu with one sword, as he says, "Beast breathing." Let's see, Fourth Fang, slice and dice, as he just starts cutting all over the place. But the Nomu would literally not even be able to get cut anywhere. As soon as Deku stabbed the sword in a bit, the sword got stuck and Deku had to use all of his strength to yank it back out, which leads to an encounter which is very similar to Inosuke's battle with the giant beast. The thing would almost destroy Deku with nothing but a couple of punches, and that one punch that landed on Deku already was enough to break four of his ribs, which is a whole lot of damage if you guys don't know. But this is when Deku would basically start fighting together with Aizawa, and they would start slowly doing a tiny bit of damage. Deku would finally be able to yank out both of his swords, and this is when he would then cut one of the Nomu's arms off. He would stab, and he would then start smashing the sword in a similar way to Inosuke, as he would cut off one of the arms. However, with the other arm, the Nomu would punch Aizawa away, and Aizawa would be sent flying into the water. As this is when he would grab Deku by his skull, and he would immediately start crushing Deku's vocal cords, as it's at that moment that Deku's life flashes before his eyes. And this is where, just kidding, we're not going to be ending it here. Deku would immediately be saved by All Might, who would crash inside and say, "I am here," as he would be angry and he would punch that Nomu, and this basically leads to the encounter with the Nomu happening just as it did in the original USJ. Some of you guys are probably, now that we are barely 30 minutes into the What If, you guys are probably like, "Dude, you were speedrunning this What If, aren't you?" And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I'm kind of speedrunning this What If, I'm not gonna lie. This one, I just want to have the most fun with it and get as much detail as I can without, just giving you guys those boring moments where nothing really happens. And I'm trying more of a Ty Learn approach. I don't know if many of you guys watch him, but if you do, you would realize that he has a very fast-paced storytelling, and so I'm just trying to tell a story in a little bit more of a fast-paced way. Not exactly copying him, but just trying to go a little faster with the story. If you guys do enjoy the storytelling, basically go down below, leave a like, and let me know if you guys enjoy it. If not, obviously tell me what you guys think. I'm always open to criticism, but with that being said, don't be too rude. And with that being said, let's go back into the story. This basically leads to Deku going to the hospital and being healed in about 3 days, recovering his voice, and just honestly thinking about everything that happened at the USJ. Deku, after he's finally healed, would vow to never lose again. And during the 2-week break that they have off, Deku would train on total concentration breathing, which would amp Deku so much more. He would of course be able to master that, and as well, he would even go out to the wilderness for one of the weeks that he had, as Deku would train by himself in the wilderness, lifting extremely heavy boulders, giant ones at that, 4 times the size of the ones that the Demon Slayer's characters originally had to do while they were training with the Wind Pillar. And this would basically lead to Deku getting mad powerful. Deku would have a lot of gains from this training, and this would basically lead to them all going back to class. In this version, of course, the little situation with Katsumi would happen where she would call everyone extras, and they would have class 1B and the rest of the general study. And the rest of the general study students basically challenged the UA. But all that stuff is kind of irrelevant, and we're just going to basically skip over to the day of the sports festival, to which Deku would not be told to give out the speech. Instead, it would of course be Katsumi, to which she would of course say that she's going to defeat everybody, and she would not give an absolute damn about what anybody thinks. So yeah, she definitely is a little bit of a bad ASS. I don't know if I can even say that word, but that being said, this would basically lead to Midnight blowing the gun at the air, the flare gun, yes, and everybody would go off. The race would begin, and immediately Deku would see that Todoroki would shoot his eyes out everywhere. Deku, as soon as he sees that, would decide that there's only one thing to do: cut down that ice so that it doesn't get in his way. As Deku would literally just start cutting at the floor each step he takes, he literally just starts stabbing the katanas into the ground as he runs and just starts destroying the ice as he just runs through that thing. Deku would clear the area with the ice, and this is when the 0-pointer area would arrive. He would be hand in hand with Todoroki and Bakugo, and they would all clear it in different ways. Deku would slash one of the 0-pointer's legs, causing it to fall using the third fang, as he would cut off the leg with a double slice, which just decimates the leg, and it would fall over as Deku would continue to race everywhere. This one, they would finally arrive to the area with the little stepping stones, and Deku would jump over the entirety of the thing. He would use his beast breathing, total concentration, and he would just jump over that entire thing. This leads to the landmines, and Deku in this version is literally so fast that he does not get touched by a single one. He has no need to use the little landmines to get ahead of them, due to the fact that this man is an absolute mad lad. He is insane. So Deku just runs through that thing, and the explosions actually end up affecting Katsumi. Sorry, I forgot that I gender bended her. But and Todoroki. And this basically leads to Deku just being very, very cocky towards Katsumi after the race. This actually leads to a little bit of a different team. Instead of what happened in the original, what ends up happening here is that Deku is paired with himself. Instead of a rocket, it's Katsumi, and of course we have Hatsume, and then we have Tokiyami, but not for the reason that he had in canon, because Deku doesn't think, he just does. Deku in this version picks Tokiyami not because he's powerful or because he views any significance, but because he thinks that Tokiyami's little head, his weird deformality from his mutation, is like a mask similar to his, and he kind of respects the drip. So Deku would call Tokiyami, and Tokiyami would be like, sure, I'll be on his team. This would basically lead to everything happening as you guys would expect. Todoroki would of course try to go after them, but Deku, Katsumi, Tokiyami, and Mei Hatsume, who basically lets them slide around all over the place extremely fast, would definitely barely end up winning by a millimeter. Just due to the fact that, Todoroki by himself is definitely extremely powerful, especially when you compare him to Deku, which has 0 quirk, but is way more powerful than our, normal Deku. If I had to compare him to how strong he would be if he did have one for all, I'd say this version of Deku is about as strong as 40% full cowling. That being said, this is when we are now going to basically skip to the first couple of battles. Deku versus Shinso. He would of course still be told by Ojiro that he has some sort of weird ability, and Deku would of course take that to mind. But as soon as the battle starts, Shinso would start talking a lot of smack to Deku, and Inosuke being the type of person that he is, and due to Deku being his reincarnation, Deku does not take any of those insults lightly. He literally takes everything that Shinso says to heart. And when Shinso tells him that he's weak and that he'll be even more powerful than him, Deku loses it and just yells at him. He goes, "Hi!" And it's at that moment that Shinso just catches him. But Deku actually threw the sword up into the air, to which it would stab into his leg, to his foot, and Deku would get snapped back out of it as he would start running. But every time he would talk to him, he would cut himself, which leads to Shinso waking up, or no, Deku waking up from getting caught from the mind control. And as soon as he arrives in front of Shinso, he would beat the man senselessly. He would literally just destroy the man. Like, he would not let anything go wrong. And this is when it would lead to basically him going to the waiting room, where he and Katsumi are basically just talking about everything. She would say that he's going to be her biggest opponent, and she would say that right now they're not friends. As Deku would say, "I know, we're rivals. We've always been rivals." Deku would just be screaming that, and this is when Todoroki would walk inside, as he would say that he basically declares war on them. In this version, Todoroki doesn't believe that Deku is some sort of secret love child. Honestly, I still can't get over that, dude. Like, how does Todoroki even think that Deku is like All Might's son? Like, I understand the quirk, but dude, like, you have no proof. Why are you out here assuming? That being said, this basically leads to Deku and Todoroki. And I'm going to start this match off by saying that Deku wins because Todoroki, to put it simply, without his flames and nothing but ice, Deku is not going to lose. If you guys have read the Demon Slayer manga, you would have seen that Inosuke and the little butterfly girl, the one that ended up with Tanjiro, basically ended up defeating a little bit of a very similar ice user. And of course, Deku at this point is... I kind of don't want to say it like this because some of you guys might be like, "You're making him too overpowered," but I don't care, like, at all. But Deku is far beyond that level, and if I were to comparatively put Todoroki versus him, the demon would just obliterate Todoroki without a second thought. So when Todoroki uses his giant iceberg and shoots it at Deku, Deku would do something very similar to what Katsuki Bakugo did, the guy version in the original canon, where he just destroyed the ice. Deku would just start slashing it immediately, breaking through, and as soon as he gets close to Todoroki, he slashed him across his chest, leaving a permanent scar, which Todoroki is not going to get rid of at all. And Todoroki just fell to the ground. And right when he fell, Deku grabbed him by the legs and threw him out of the arena, literally slamming him into the ground as he jumped off as well, but Deku jumped off last, so Todoroki lost. And that's basically how the Todoroki versus Deku fight went down. And yeah, Deku is far past the Inosuke at the end of the series version that we usually have in the original canon, due to the fact that in the My Hero Academia world, you gotta be way more powerful than that if you're gonna try to do something. These people literally change the weather with one punch, so yeah, Deku needs this type of power. That being said, this is when Deku would end up having to fight his last match, this being Deku versus Katsumi, which actually ends up being a very interesting match, and I'm not even going to spoil how this one ends. The fight would start with Midnight basically shooting off the flare gun and declaring them to both start. Immediately, Cementos would heal the arena as much as he could, and Katsumi would immediately blast herself out of Deku's range, to which she would start using nothing but AP shots, and Deku would, try to use like long range slashes or the wind pressure of slashes to get her, but due to the fact that she is way more adept to flying in the air, he cannot land a single one. And after about 2 minutes of this, Deku just gets angry. She would have pierced him a number of times, and Deku was wearing down significantly, which actually led to him getting angry and be like, "Fight me like a man!" To which everybody in the stands would just be like a man? Deku would look at her and Katsumi would just start giggling in the air, to which Deku would just be like, "How do I get her?" As Deku would basically just say, "All right, if you're not gonna come to me, I'm gonna come to you." He would literally say, beast breath, sudden throwing strike," as Deku would just throw the swords at Katsumi, and one of them would go into the crowd, to which it would almost stab somebody, and the other one would actually end up hitting Katsumi's foot, which it would actually cause her to bleed a bit, and she would start losing control over her ability to stay in the air. She would fall a little bit, barely being in Deku's range, and Deku would immediately just jump straight into the air. He would be right in front of Katsumi, grab her by the legs, hold her in a sort of like the hidden lotus stance, and he would just like slam her into the ground. Like, he does not show any mercy, bro. Like, this could be the ship to the story, but Deku, Inosuke don't be showing no type of mercy. Deku just completely obliterates her. That being said, Deku is basically declared the winner for the UA Sports Festival, and this basically leads to him getting the medal. Katsumi would still be pretty angry, and she would have to be restrained. She would say that that was just lucky, and like he didn't deserve the win. She'd be freaking out, and honestly, it would just be a pretty fun, it would make for a very, very funny scene. That being said, they would all, of course, return to school, and this is when they would all be told about the hero picking, where Midnight would walk inside, and all the names would basically go as they do in canon. If you guys aren't aware, Bakugo's name, or Katsumi's name, would be the pro hero, the explosion hero, Dynamite. Of course, homage to All Might. And in case some of you guys are wondering who ended up getting all for one, I mean one for all in this version of events, it was of course Mirio. If there's no Deku, Mirio was of course going to get a quirk, and due to the fact that I didn't end up having nobody else get it, our boy Mirio is finally going to be done justice and get the quirk. That being said, this is when Deku would pick the name of the strongest hero, Inosuke. And of course, he wasn't about to make up some whack name. He gave himself the name Inosuke because he likes it, and that's what he's going to be called. That would basically lead to Deku looking at his internships, and this is when one of the teachers at UA, or one of the pro hero, would bust in the room. It would be the little angry wolf guy. His name would be Hound Dog, and he would just be angry, like talking in gibberish, as Deku would immediately go up to him and be like, "Hey, I want to be in your agency." As he would start howling at the air, Deku would do the same. They would both like just be looked at strangely by the classroom, and Deku would end up going to Hound Dog for his agency. Some of you guys are probably like, yeah, that makes sense, and that it definitely does. We can definitely all agree on that. This leads to a lot of funny moments happening with Deku and Hound Dog out on the streets patrolling, where they end up scaring a bunch of people with their demeanors, and a lot of them would be like, "It's villains," but you know, it would be revealed that Deku was just a normal kid. And this is when we're just going to say that Hound Dog's agency is in Hosu City, just because I need Deku to fight some Nomus. I need something interesting to happen. Come on now. So this basically leads to them, seeing the Nomu stuff happening. And due to the fact that Deku was in tight with Ida perishes. Yeah, bro. If you're on your revenge stuff and you want to go fight the literal hero killer, you're not going to get saved, bro. I'm sorry to inform you guys, but Ida's done dirty in this one. He is folded. Say it with me, boys. Like a lawn chair. And yeah, that's basically what happens. That being said, Deku ends up fighting a bunch of Nomus, and due to the fact that these Nomus are way weaker than the one in the USJ, Deku is literally able to just cut the brains after Deku fights one, and it actually takes him a little while to find this out, but as soon as Deku would end up cutting off the heads, the swords that he have actually neutralize them, and they end up turning to dust. In this version, I'm just gonna say that the Nomus actually have the same property as demons, where if you cut off their heads, they basically disintegrate with nitrine swords, and that is what Deku has in this version. That being said, this basically leads to the Nomu stuff happening, and Deku actually being a big help, actually getting credit for what happens. Hound Dog would of course get in trouble, but you know, dude, that's a student. And Hound Dog and Deku end up developing a pretty dope relationship, where Deku was of course going to go over there to be his sidekick as soon as he's able to. And maybe he might make Hound Dog his sidekick once he becomes a #1 hero. Or so he told Hound Dog. That being said, this would lead to the final exams, to which Deku fails. Yeah, he's not smart. And in terms of the fight with All Might, which of course he still does have with Katsumi, they're both insane, dude. What do you want me to say? They try to fight All Might. Deku is broken, don't get me wrong, but Deku is not All Might broken just yet. So All Might still ends up clapping those cheeks, and this leads to Deku having to take the remedial course for the force training, which we are now going to get into. The mall incident never ends up happening because Deku doesn't get caught off guard, so nothing really happens there, and this would basically lead to them all taking the bus to the forest, where they would all stop, and Deku would immediately see Mandalay, as Yeah, that's where Deku sleeps every day, and Deku of course knew what was going to go down in the forest training. Deku would see Mandalay and immediately just be like, let's go, throw us off already, to which the rest of the class just looks at them, looks at Deku, and they're like, what does he mean? And she would immediately throw them all off the cliff, to which they all immediately have to start fighting the mud monsters. And due to the fact that Deku is incredibly adept to fighting them, Deku would help them reduce their time to complete this all in by 1 hour and 30 minutes. Just due to Deku telling them what the weak points in the monsters are, and they would immediately be able to handle them way faster, arriving 1 hour and 30 minutes before their original time. And this basically leads to a very normal situation happening when Deku actually arrives to the little area. When Deku sees Koda, or more specifically, when Koda sees Deku, Koda would immediately get happy and scared at the same time, because seeing Deku always gives him a little bit of flashbacks to how Deku was when he first met him. When Koda first met Deku, he was like kind of old, but he didn't lose his parents yet. So Koda was a scaredy cat when it came to Deku. But once, he became more angrier, Deku was able to calm him down, just due to the fact that Deku is more of an alpha. And if he sees someone crying like Koda over like just something that can't be helped, Deku immediately just is like, no crying. So Koda isn't exactly a little B word, because, he has somebody there to tell him, yeah, absolutely not. No, there will be no crying right now. So, there's none of that. And this basically leads to a very normal forest training arc, to which everything is kind of bland, I guess you could say. Deku does a whole lot of beast breathing training and just strength and conditioning training. And Koda actually trains with Deku. He uses his little water quirk to help Deku tank more damage. Deku is basically working on tanking damage and stuff like that. And this one we're just going to skip to the day to which Koda and Deku end up grabbing a bowl of curry and going over to their little secret spot where they always go to whenever they need some fresh air. Deku and Koda would talk for a little bit, and Deku would tell Koda if he's finally over that weakness that he had. Koda would look at Deku, smile, and say, hell yeah, he is. And Deku would just look at him, and he's like, let's go. And, they're both pretty hype. To which Muscular turns the corner, and he would immediately say, looks like I get to take out some lousy, loud brats this night. I'm gonna have fun with you two. Deku would immediately see Muscular, and he would say, it's a villain. Koda would look at the villain, and he would immediately just be like, it's him. It's the guy. And Deku would immediately, after hearing that, he wouldn't be able to put anything together. But Koda would then scream out, you're the guy who took out my parents. And immediately after Deku hears that, he goes absolutely berserk mode. Deku gets a little bit of a rage boost similar to that of Dragon Ball Z, and Deku obliterates Muscular. He would kill Muscular 100% after he finds out what he did to his brother Koda's parents. Deku would obliterate him using the beast breathing. Let's see. He would take off his head, so I want to say that he ends up using Fourth Fang. He ends up using Fourth Fang to completely decimate Muscular. And this basically leads to Deku immediately rushing into the forest, beginning to look for the rest of his classmates, which is kind of boring-ish, I guess you could say. Not really much to cover. Everything kind of stays the same up until the point where they end up basically finding Bakugo and Todoroki, and when Bakugo and Tokiyami end up getting kidnapped by Mr. Compress, not Moonfish, sorry, Mr. Compress, Deku in this version is actually able to run after him fast enough to the point where he's able to jump in the portal last second, right before they actually get teleported away. And this leads to Tokiyami, Deku, and Katsumi ending up fighting against the entirety of the League of Villains in the hidden in their hidden version. That being said, Deku and Katsumi and Tokiyami would immediately start using their quirks. And due to Tokiyami being in the dark, he's doing a lot better than he would if it was daytime. So they would end up obliterating the villains. Deku is way more powerful than any of them. Katsumi, she can definitely take out someone like Dabi, who at this point is a little weaker, and they would end up fighting against, Shigaraki, who Deku just decimates. Shigaraki's arms, they would be gone. Deku would have taken care of those a long time ago. And this is when a black substance would appear. This isn't Kurogiri. Deku was actually able to successfully destroy Kurogiri by cutting his metal piece off, and that would basically have ultimately destroyed Kurogiri, which leads to All For One arriving. As he would immediately arrive and see Shigaraki's arms off, he would get angry and blast a hole straight through Tokiyami. As Tokiyami dies, but it's a sacrifice that needs to happen. This would lead to Deku and Katsumi seeing their classmate fall right before their eyes, and they would both immediately just be like, no. This is when All For One would shoot a black tendril straight through Deku, as Deku would actually be able to barely dodge it, but Katsumi would actually get almost hit, but she would end up dodging with an explosion. This one, they would both rush at All For One, and he would use a giant attack which obliterates the entire area, decimating it to a scenario very similar to the one that happened in canon. And this would basically lead to the battle against All For One with Katsumi and Deku. They would both rush at him, but they wouldn't actually be able to get close. Deku's powerful, but All For One is on a completely different level. This is when All For One would start slowly decimating Deku and Katsumi. She would be on a very bad losing end, and she would be in very critical condition by the time where I'm going to start things off where it gets serious. This would lead to Deku actually starting to get sluggish after his movements start getting very weak. He can't get close, the slashes don't work. All For One has a barrier quirk, and this leads to All For One decimating Deku, which shoot him with a bunch of fire, which ends up burning Deku's abdominal area, and it's just insane. It's a very crazy battle. Think of what would just imagine in your head, what if Inosuke and All For One were to fight? That's basically what's going down, but think of an Inosuke that's 4 times stronger. And that's pretty much what's going on. But even though he is 4 times stronger, he still can't hit All For One, which would lead to basically All For One getting an opening on Deku and shooting him with a black tendril right into his heart. And this is where our story ends. Just kidding, you really thought Inosuke can move his organs, dude. He literally did that in the fight against the second upper moon. So yeah, Deku ends up moving his heart to a different area, and as soon as All For One pulls him in and grabs him by the throat, Deku would act as if he's basically taken out. He would act unconscious. He would stop his breathing immediately. All For One would begin to laugh, and in that instant, Deku would use both of his swords to immediately slash off All For One's head. He would destroy it completely. All For One would be no more. All For One's head would fall down onto the ground, and this is when a chopper would finally arrive, which would actually have All Might on it. No, a chopper wouldn't arrive. If a chopper arrives, Deku's most likely going to get expelled for literally just taking someone's head off. Deheading them, yeah, that's not going to slide at UA. I know he's crazy and nothing's ever happened yet, but if that goes on the news, Deku is of course going to be done for. So All Might would arrive and would realize what Deku had just done. He took down the greatest threat. The power of One For All has been cultivating for years for this to happen. And some kid who was quirkless, a little bit insane too, was able to defeat him. He would literally thank Deku so much and take him, Tokiyami, and Bakugo to the hospital. Tokiyami didn't actually end up, perishing. I can't do my boy Tokiyami like that. I mean, as much as he doesn't talk and he isn't really that important to the series, I can't do the man that dirty. He ends up barely surviving. However, he is going to have to heal for a very, very long time. It takes him about 1 year to fully heal. Therefore, it's going to take him a little longer to become a pro hero. That being said, this is when Deku would finally wake up at the hospital about 2 days later, where he would have basically had his healing sped up by recovery girl. Katsumi would be right by Deku's bedside due to the fact that Deku, he got pierced right in the heart area. So that operation, it had to be fast. And yeah, it was very gruesome. It was a very intense battle. That being said, Deku would be at the hospital when out of nowhere, Deku would rise in the sort of Undertaker fashion, and he'd be like, "I won! I'm victorious!" He'd be screaming as All Might would walk into the room. He would thank him for everything, and Deku would realize that he defeated somebody to which even All Might can't do. Deku would start screaming in excitement, saying that he's even more powerful than the symbol of peace himself. And All Might would basically just thank Deku, he would just give him so many thanks. Deku would, of course, basically end up finally having to go back to school, and this is when he would have the provisional license exam. I hate this arc. I literally hate it with a passion. It's so boring. So I'm not going to cover this, at all. None of that. Absolutely not. Deku would end up failing just due to the fact that, he is not kind. So Deku gets failed by the points of which when he rescues people, yeah, he's efficient at it, but he scares them. And they get very thrown off guard by his very rowdy nature. That being said, this basically leads to Deku failing in that part, but when Todoroki and Inosuke are fighting against Gang Orca and they are basically contradicting each other with their quirks, Deku would go up to them, literally knock them both out and rush at Gang Orca, as he would end up dismantling this man. He would destroy Gang Orca, there's no other way to put it. He would literally obliterate Gang Orca. And this is when, he basically ends up getting told he failed, even though he literally took down a pro hero. They would tell him that he still needs more to learn in terms of talking to people and being a people person, to which Deku gets angry, but, he understands. It's not something that he can do with nothing but his strength alone, and if he wants to become a hero, so be it. So that's what Deku ends up doing. He ends up having to retake everything, and this is when he ends up having a fight. Basically, no, not having a fight, but going back to school for the day where they end up meeting UA's big three: Mirio, Takami, and Nejire, where they would basically all tell them that they need experience, to which Mirio would end up challenging the class. Mirio, of course, wipes the floor with everybody, and Deku is included in that. Deku gets just stomped because Mirio in this version of events has had One For All for a very long time. His body is way more ready than Deku's was, meaning that he has not only his quirk, which is actually similar to Kamui at this point, due to the fact that it got amped by One For All's boosting nature, but on top of that, he also has 40% of One For All, and that is no joke at all. I don't know if you guys are reading the manga at the current moment, but 40% of One For All is equivalent to what Deku's strength is at right now. But Mirio also has a phasing ability and the rest of One For All's other quirks, meaning he already has unlocked all of them except for Fajin and the final quirk of the second user. That being said, sorry for any spoilers that I just gave for those of you who are like, what? That happened? Sorry, I forgot to give you guys a spoiler warning. However, this would basically lead to Deku, being very thrilled by Mirio's power. His ability to fight is incredible. Deku loves the challenge, and when Mirio asked him to go with Sir Night-Eye, Deku would of course accept. He would of course have to make Sir Night-Eye laugh, and I'm just gonna say that Deku does end up making him laugh due to the fact that how rowdy Inosuke is and how some of the things that he does are just funny, in general. He's so dumb that sometimes it's hilarious, and that's basically what would happen. Deku would do things that are just so dumb that not Overhaul, but Sir Night-Eye would laugh at Deku's just dumb, I guess stupidity. He would laugh at literally that. And this is when they would both be told to go on patrol, to which they would run into Eri, who would actually run into Deku's arms. Deku would hug her, and he knows off rip, dude. He can sense the killing intent coming off of Overhaul. It's all over him. So Deku immediately after sensing that would take out his swords. However, before he even gets to attack Overhaul, Mirio would be on it. He would go straight at him, and when Overhaul tries to touch Mirio, Mirio would appear behind him, punching him with a full cowling 40% punch, which would break his spine, similar to in a fashion which Minato ended up hitting. Who was it? Mirio ended up hitting. Not Mirio, but Minato ended up hitting Obito in the original story of Naruto. And yeah, that's basically how Mirio ends up handling Overhaul. This leads to them all having a little bit of a raid arc, but due to the fact that there's no presence of Eri and she's not a big deal because she is already saved, they can have more time to prepare. Therefore, the operation is more successful than it was in canon, and they have way more manpower, including the fact that this version of Deku is far beyond anything that version of Deku is. Deku is just OP. This basically leads to the whole gentle criminal stuff happening, and Deku of course forgets stuff because he's just dumb. So he ends up having to fight Gentle, and when Gentle uses his little plastic elasticity quirk, Deku literally cuts through the air. He just chops that and he destroys Gentle, to put it lightly. And this is basically where the story ends off. In this version of events, a lot of things ended up changing because of Deku. The storyline relatively stayed the same, however, many of the My Hero Academia events ended up becoming a lot easier for our hero. Deku ended up having a little bit of a better life, even if the beginning was rough. Some people have hard upbringings, but you know, that's not all there is to life. The rest of it and how you choose to live your life is what really determines everything. And that is basically the moral of today's story. Let me know what you guys thought down below in the comment section. It was a pretty dope story to do. What if Deku was Inosuke was a lot of fun to do. It was pretty dope, to say the least. Like this story was pretty lit. In case some of you guys are wondering what ends up happening with the Liberation Army, for those of my manga readers, they basically end up getting handled by Mirio once he becomes a pro hero in a couple of months after those events happened. And Deku, when he becomes a pro hero, he does not, I'm repeating this, does not end up actually becoming number one. Mirio's number one hero. He has one for all. Deku, he's OP. He gets even more powerful. But to put it lightly, Deku is quirkless. And due to the fact that he doesn't have one for all, there's no way he's going to match, like, literally, like, it might as well be Obito, dude. Obito might as well be the number one hero, because that's literally what Mirio is with one for all. And yeah, that basically leads to Deku becoming number 2. Katsumi would become number 4. Todoroki would become number 3 after he finally gets over his weird thing with his fire. And that's basically how all of these little events end up happening. This, I think, is a pretty successful story. Let me know what you guys thought down below in the comment section. Again, remember guys, my second channel link will be down in the description, the Akatsuki. I will be posting part 2 very soon, so do bear with me. And with that being said, I love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Zether, and I am out. Please.